Welcome to Alex Ribeiro Underwater Coaching. This is the third video of a series on grading underwater B-RAW images from Blackmagic Pocket 6K in daVinci Resolve 17. Here we talk about keying, which is defining points where the parameter is changed during video playback. In Resolve, almost everything can be keyed. When we zoom in or out, when we pan within the shot, when we adjust audio, all of this is keying. Basically, it is scrolling to the point we want the change to start, pressing the gray square so it becomes red, then scroll to the place where it reaches the desired value and adjust. By default, the square next to it will also become red. When we play it, we can see the change taking place. You should be already familiar with it. Now, we will be doing this with nodes, which is happening in the color page rather than in the edit page. Why is this useful? Often, during a scene, the values change so much that the initial grade isn't suitable in mid or the last parts of it. Fortunately, B-RAW has so much information that we are able to deal with a fair amount of changes in light and color within the same scene. That's when keying comes into equation. We can key exposure, contrast, white balance, so they follow the changes happening during the scene. Note that this cannot be done in the raw menu. This one must be adjusted to the middle values of the whole take. Also, in the color page, we don't key individual values. We key nodes. It's up to you to select which values you want to adjust in the node or nodes you are about to key. In the wheels menu, we have controls for white balance, temperature and tint, contrast, exposure, here named offset, shadows, highlights and saturation. Adjustments can also be done through curves. You should know roughly how to adjust them if you have already watched the video on curves. On this sample footage, we see that it becomes overexposed on top as the camera approaches the diver. Let's grade it and try to reduce this effect. We follow the steps of the previous video for grading this shot, starting to defining raw parameters and adjusting raw sliders. The idea is setting a preliminary saturation and contrast, then adjusting white balance through temperature and tint. After the colors look balanced in the midtones, it is time to reset contrast and saturation to somewhere closer to definitive. After, we move to the wheels to correct shifts of tone between shadows and highlights. We move to curves to remove the excessive red on the water surface. If we look at the scopes, we'll notice that the blue channel is clipping on the highlights, so we revert to the raw menu. There are many ways to deal with it, but it looked more natural to reduce the saturation and slightly correct white balance. Back to curves, we adjust the water saturation and luminosity. There are too many oranges in the rec walls, so we lower orange saturation. We create a round window node to match the illuminated area on the left to the darker one on the right. Inside the window we adjust curves, which gives us more control than adjusting shadows or highlights. Then we warm the shadows as we think they are too bluish. Then we adjust the highlights again through curves. And finally we do a slight correction on the shadow tone. As we scroll through our timeline, we notice that our grade was nice for the beginning. But when the camera approaches the diver, there are too many reds. We need to create a node where we adjust the grading so this frame looks right. Of course, it will make the beginning of the take look wrong. We adjust highlights and shadows on the wheels area, then lower the red curve in the highlights. As it doesn't seem to be enough, we still lower its saturation on the hue versus saturation panel. When the grading is finished, it is time to keyframe it. On this monitor configuration, we need to replace the scopes area with the keyframe timeline. Notice we have a separate line for each node. The one we need to keyframe is the third. So we bring the bar to the beginning and set the key output for this node to 0. We advance the bar until we need this node's adjustments to kick in, and raise the output a bit until we get enough. Then we keep doing it in steps until it gets to 1 or 100%. Finally, we play the scene and check if the transition is smooth and pleasing. Indeed it is, but after all these changes in exposure and saturation, we notice some purple-green fringing on the right. Fortunately, Resolve has an effect to deal with it. We just need to play with the sliders until the fringing is gone. As we did on the previous video, we now reduce noise. Then we increase the mid-tone detail. After, we slightly sharpen the edges. We go back to some final readjustments, both on raw and curve menus. This time, we even create another window to deal with the remaining excessive reds on the shipwreck right wall. Of course, we are applying the change to the outside of the window. The final result looks very decent. We could still adjust it further to match the other scenes and create the mood for an eventual narrative. Hope you guys find it useful for your own workflow. See you on the next video or in Tulamben for some great dives.